During the Mexican Revolution, the United States and other countries intervened in political, militaristic, and economic ways in order to maintain the control they held in Mexico. During his presidency, Porfirio Diaz wanted Mexico to become modernized and become a peer in the modern world, and thus he encouraged foreign countries to become involved in Mexico during his presidency. He believed that encouraging foreign investment would speed up the process of economic and industrial modernization. There were extensive railroads built before and during Diaz's regime. By the end of the 1880s, lines that connected Atlantic and Pacific ports were mostly controlled by Britain and the United States. When the Mexican Revolution broke out in 1910, foreign countries had established a presence in Mexico that they wanted to protect, and they became involved in the various power struggles of the Mexican Revolution.
The United States had numerous reasons for intervention in the Mexican Revolution. Many of the women in America and some of the religious groups were interested in intervening in the revolution, as they could not watch the Mexicans suffer from hunger, poverty, and Diaz's oppressive regime. Another prominent motivation for U.S. intervention in the Mexican Revolution was economic interest. Many American businesses had both direct and indirect capital investments in the Mexican economy. The biggest of these investments was oil exportation. Naturally, these Americans wanted to intervene to protect such vital investments that could be threatened by an unstable government. The U.S. had political and military reasons for intervening as well. Woodrow Wilson wanted to implement a constitutional government in Mexico, as well as avert European interference. His goal was to restore order in Mexico simply by convincing the Mexican dictator of the benefits of short-term rule. Furthermore, U.S. military commanders threatened to intervene as they claimed American lives were endangered. Yet the U.S. was not the only country interested in intervening in the Mexican Revolution. By 1910, over 27% of Mexican land was owned by foreigners. Indeed, foreign countries sought to gain more land through intervention, as well as other resources, including railroads and oil.
In 1913, Henry Layton Wilson, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico under the Taft administration, got involved in the overthrow of Francisco Madero, a liberal who had overthrown Diaz in 1911. Ambassador Wilson did not like Madero's policies at all. On February 10, 1913, rebellion broke out in Mexico City, where the U.S. Embassy was located. Wilson demanded that Madero restore safety to the Americans there, but this request was not met. Then, Henry Wilson, under his own authority, met with General Victoriano Huerta, who was then officially Madero's commander at the time, to demand an end to the fighting in Mexico City and the safety of the American embassy. Wilson recognized Madero's weakening rule and advocated privately for the transition of presidency to Huerta. He also convinced a group of Mexican senators to persuade Madero to step down. Madero refused, but Huerta deposed him and became president. Shortly thereafter, Huerta's men murdered Madero. The U.S. government got much more involved in the Mexican Revolution after Huerta came to power in 1913. President Wilson came into office 6 weeks after Huerta's coup and did not like Huerta's government at all. One of Wilson's first acts in office was to withhold diplomatic recognition of Mexico's new leader. Wilson's goal was to force Huerta out and gain the support of Venustiano Carranza. Wilson described Huerta as a diverting brute, so false, so sly, so full of bravado, yet so courageous, seldom sober, and always irresponsible. Wilson's policy towards Huerta was fostering anti-Americanism in Mexico, and American industrialists began to urge Wilson to recognize Huerta on condition that Huerta and Carranza each promised to hold a free election. However, this compromise was not accepted by Wilson, who wrote a note to Huerta stating that he must give up the next election. In response, Huerta dissolved the Mexican Congress and arrested 110 of its members, an insult to the ideal of democracy that Wilson wished to promote. In April 1914, the gunboat USS Dolphin under Admiral Mayo was at Tampico. 7 sailors and a paymaster went ashore for supplies. Huerta had caused the ports to be under martial law, and no ship was allowed to land there, but Admiral Mayo was not informed of this. Upon docking, Mexican soldiers arrested the sailors.
After they realized the misunderstanding, the sailors were released and an apology was sent to Mayo. This apology was not accepted by Mayo, who decided a 21-gun salute to the U.S. was the appropriate charge and also informed Washington about the incident. The press quickly picked it up and reported Tampico affair as a national insult. Meanwhile, President Huerta questioned why the U.S. wanted a salute from a nation it did not even recognize. After the Tampico incident, Wilson addressed Congress on April 20, 1914, asking for the support and using military force in Mexico. General Huerta has set his power up in the city of Mexico, such as it is, without right and by methods for which there can be no justification. We do not desire to control in any degree the affairs of our sister republic. Our feelings for the people of Mexico is one of deep and genuine friendship, and everything that we have done so far or refrained from doing has proceeded from our desire to help them. Woodrow Wilson, April 20th, 1914. Tampico was an important oil-producing area, which U.S. companies Rockefeller Standard Oil and the Texas Oil Company wanted to keep control of. Wilson ordered U.S. Marines to occupy customs in Tampico to protect U.S. oil interests. This occupation continued for 6 months and also led to anti-American demonstrations in Mexico and Latin America.
In the early morning of April 21st, Wilson was awakened to hear that a German ship, the Ypiranga, had arrived in Veracruz to support Huerta. On this ship came the German ambassador, Admiral von Hintze, who offered illegal weapons and military aid against the rebels of Mexico. Earlier in the year, Huerta had promised to cut off oil to Great Britain in event of war with Germany, and in return, 3 ships, the Ypiranga, Bavaria, and Kronprinzessin, were loaded with weapons for Huerta. The U.S. Navy halted Ypiranga, and sailors and Marines came ashore and seized the customs house, the rail yards and rolling stock, the cable, telegraph, and post office of Veracruz. Not surprisingly, the Mexicans resisted and both soldiers and civilians opened fire. By the day's end, 19 Americans and 126 Mexicans lay dead and many were wounded. When the Veracruz occupation threatened to escalate the war, 3 Latin American countries offered mediation: Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, known as the ABC Powers, organized a conference in Niagara Falls, Canada. Here they brought together representatives from the U.S. and Mexico. Together they negotiated that Huerta would be forced to retire and Carranza would replace him. In return, the U.S. had to legally recognize Carranza's government. Not only did this conference mediate the conflict between the U.S. and Mexico, it also became an inspiration for Pan-American cooperation.
Immediately after Carranza became president, Pancho Villa took over part of northern Mexico. On March 8, 1916, Pancho Villa and his band of 500 to 1,000 men raided Columbus, New Mexico, burning and robbing stores. In the United States, Villa represented rogue, mindless violence. U.S. forces tried to repress the attack. In response, President Wilson sent forces commanded by General John J. Pershing into Mexico to capture Villa. Virtually the entire regular army was involved, and most of the National Guard had been concentrated on the border. War would probably have been declared if not for World War I. Despite Pershing's efforts, Villa knew the terrain in Mexico too well to be captured. Carranza also protected U.S. intervention and asked the U.S. to recall their troops. Pershing was forced to abandon the mission and return to the United States, and troops were withdrawn from Mexico by February 1917.
The Zimmermann Note was a telegram sent in 1917 by Germany to Mexico. This note implied that Germany would support Mexico if they went to war against the U.S. The telegram was intercepted by the British, and when news of its contents were released, the American public was furious. President Woodrow Wilson used the Zimmermann Note to help generate support for U.S. declaration of war against Germany in April. Mexican President Carranza, however, denied the alliance with Germany and insisted on neutrality. The U.S. thus tried to sway Carranza to support the Allies in World War I. But Carranza repeatedly advocated for neutrality and stood firmly by the newly drafted Mexican Constitution. Though most of these foreign interventions seem like they cause more harm than good for Mexican citizens, it should be noted that an immense amount of aid was provided to Mexico by the Red Cross with the help of Philip Hanna, a diplomat. Unlike most U.S. diplomats, Philip Hanna, the chief consular representative of the U.S., demonstrated that he both cared for the Mexican people and was willing to work to help them. Hanna called for Mexican patriotism and was a major influencer in the relief effort. In late 1914 and early 1915, Mexico suffered from a severe food shortage in Monterrey, Mexico City, and other areas. Hanna helped combat this shortage by using the American press to raise awareness and Texan civic organizations and the American Red Cross to provide relief. Hanna was successful in providing relief to over 20,000 Mexican citizens, mostly in Monterrey. Though the relief effort in Monterrey was very successful, not all of the relief provided was met positively by the Mexican government. The Red Cross was condemned as an enemy, and people were encouraged to deny all food they provided or else be convicted of treason. Overall, U.S. involvement in the Mexican Revolution had numerous impacts, including increased hostility of Mexicans toward the U.S. Indeed, experts today claim the relations between Mexico and the U.S. almost reached a breaking point, immediately after and during the Mexican Revolution. Despite these strained relations, many Mexicans fled the country and came to the U.S. as a place of freedom and safety. Over 1 million refugees entered America, and the effects of this are still visible in American society today, as Mexican immigrants have altered the social, cultural, and economic texture of the land. Today, relations between the U.S. and Mexico are on much better terms.
The U.S. was heavily involved in the Mexican Revolution, as were several other countries. The U.S. had economic interests, such as the investments they had in Mexico and their oil, political interests, including a goal to spread democracy and overthrow presidents they did not like, and militaristic interests as they felt threatened in the Tampico affair and Villa's invasion. The major countries that got involved with the Mexican Revolution, apart from the U.S., were Germany, who used their Mexican influence to damage the U.S., and the ABC powers, who helped mediate the situation between the U.S. and Mexico after the Tampico affair. Overall, the Mexican Revolution was a profound war that will live forever in the histories of the U.S., Mexico, and other countries that made the consequential decision to intervene.